The fishery, together with a Danish consultants firm, together with other ministries in the government, together with a lot of international partners, requested money for a project where you would try to get local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge into the management. And here in Greenland, we were focusing on any kind of hunter's knowledge that could help us in our management here in the government. We have people from Norway also sitting here from International Center for Reindeer Husbandry, and we work together with a Finnish organization called Snow Change. And each had their goal, each worked. In Greenland, we were also focusing on developing the schemes that we made under another project in North Greenland, Usuna, try to test them if they would work in other areas. We had a focus on muskox and reindeer here now because they are locally managed. The advice is also national, so we didn't have to await any kind of advice internationally. They were thought up in doing how to do minimum counts, so you would have data that they themselves collected. How big is the herd, how big is the stock down in their areas. Now I'm talking about Asu. Nanortalik also were part of the project. Muskox were removed back in 2014. We also worked together with Isadok Reindeer Station and Dudodor, the two reindeer herds we have here in Greenland. So they all could have some kind of local documentation management already. That's why we wanted to continue our collaboration with these four. That's how they were picked. Besides being taught in doing these minimum counts, we also wanted to give them some kind of tools for how they could give quota advice, how they could say how much should be taken out of the herds. And this is the calculator that's going to be presented now by the developer and also by Christine from the Nature Institute. So the people that you do not know here is Colin Daniel from Canada, working with the model, Christine Cuyler from the Nature Institute, working on muskox and reindeer, and Martin Enghoff from Nordego, the Danish consultants firm, who are specialized in how to collect local knowledge. So here you go, Colin.
Okay. Thank you, Nette. So I'm going to just give you a little background and demonstration on the caribou and muskox calculator that we've developed as part of this project. A little bit of background: I'm an ecologist from Canada, and I work developing computer tools to help manage different natural resources. And one of the areas I work in is with caribou in Canada, and we have developed this calculator and some other similar tools over the last 25 years to help manage different herds in Canada and Alaska in the Arctic with caribou. The calculator I'm going to demonstrate today is one of these tools. It's been used on maybe 6 or 7 herds in Canada and Alaska already for doing calculations of and projections for caribou herds. The software is available for free. It gets funded by all the different agencies. So over the last 20 years probably, various agencies in Canada and the United States have contributed money to its development at different times. And the way we do this is an agency will contribute 1 year. We will add some features. All users from all agencies take advantage of that. And then the next year, maybe another agency finds a little money, we add some more, and this is how the software is built and continues to grow over time. So what you see here today has been developed in large part by several projects over the last 10 years. Our plan and our hope is to move the tool I will show you today onto the web. So right now it runs strictly on a desktop computer, but that's because we haven't yet found the necessary resources to move it from a desktop to the web, but that is the intent. And we always like to get feedback on it from anybody who tries to use it, because that's another way that we improve it over time. So if any of you ever decide to download and try it, please send me feedback if you like, about what you like and don't like. So I'm now just going to take you through a few slides that show you the calculations, the math that goes behind this calculator. And its objective is to take an estimate of any population. In this case, we're going to show you primarily with muskox. So you might have a population, and you know through a minimum count that may be generated through a survey or through local community inputs, that on a certain date, here I show it with June 15th of 2017, we estimate a total population. This example is for Iwitut. And then we also break that total population down into a number of categories based on the age and sex of the animals. Okay? And then our goal is to then predict what that population will look like 1 year later. And not just the total, but also the number of animals we project might be there in those different age and sex categories. And the way we do that, it's much like you might do a budget for your finances, where you have a certain amount of money in different bank accounts, and you want to project ahead to see if you're going to run out of money or have some savings a year later. We do the same thing, only instead of dollars or kroner, we use numbers of animals. So the calculations that go into projecting forward how many animals there will be is we start with the population today, or in this case in June. And the first process that we use to change those number of animals is we know that a certain number of them will die each year due to natural causes. Okay? And so we get estimates, again, from survey data on what those numbers would be. And we remove those animals from our different accounts and our accounts of different, the number of animals in each age and sex category. The second process that we represent here is the harvest that might occur on one of these herds. So again, here we may know the quota for an area, and so we could put that quota into our calculator and have those animals removed from the population in our calculations. And the last, third process is that every year we know there's a certain number of new animals that enter the population as calves that are born from the older cows, okay? And again, we have to have an estimate of that birth rate, how many calves we expect for every cow in our population. And the last thing we do is we age the animals. So any animal that on June 15th was a calf will become a 1-year-old the next year, and so on and so forth. So that is the entire calculator, its calculations, okay? So I'll now just switch to the software. So the software that we've developed for this calculator, there are two ways to interact with the calculator. We have what's called the full version of the calculator, which is generally used by scientists and managers, and it's more sophisticated and requires more training. And then we have what we call the light version, which is a very simple version that is intended to be used by hunters and people in communities. Okay? And so I'm going to start by showing you the full version very briefly. So the full version, without getting into the details, what we do is we have to put in estimates of all those parameters that I just showed you on the previous slide. So the first thing we have to do is estimate on the start of our projections, which in my case here in the example was June of 2017, how many animals we think there are in each sex and age category that I showed you before. So this is, again, in this case, derived from a minimum count. I don't know, Christine, do you want to say anything about that?
Any of the numbers you see are taken directly from the minimum count of Iwitut muskox that were counted by the local hunters and hunting officer Pernugara Hansen. Also, any of the harvest numbers you see are the actual harvest of that sex or age group that year as per Sarmandingschema, the hunter reports for EV2. So these are numbers that we've pumped in to get things started.
And I just correct myself, the example I'm showing you here actually is starting in 2015, so this was the minimum count, the count done by the community in 2015. We also started in 2017, but we did this example 2 years earlier just to see how it worked. So that's the first thing we need. The second thing we need is what we call the birth rate. So again, for every age of cow, this is calves, 1 to 2 year olds, 3 to 4 year olds, and older cows, what proportion of those cows give a calf each year? Yep.
And again, this is taken, we have many years of minimum counts that Barnugara has done with calves. These are not pulled out of the air. This is what the results and what the locals believe is the way it is. So we put in the information that is for EV2, for those animals that has been observed.
Right. So, for example, here you see that any cows that are 2 years old or younger do not give birth to any calves. And those that are 3 years old and older, for every 100 cows, you expect 56 calves. Okay? So that was the birth rate. The second is what percentage or proportion of animals die each year due to natural causes, okay, other than harvest. And this was estimated in this example, although I think we revised these later to be lower, but as an example here, we estimated that 7% of cows will die each year due to natural causes, and 9.5% of bulls, it's a higher mortality rate for bulls, will die each year. The last thing to put in is our estimate of the harvest each year. So as an example, I'll just go down to 2017. Okay? So these 8 lines here represent the quota that that was decided on. I don't know the whole process, but was arrived upon for that herd. For example, it shows here that no female calves or male calves were to be harvested. And as an example down here, it shows that 77 bulls of age 5 or older, which are considered trophy bulls, were allocated for harvest in 2017. Okay? And in this example, we also put in the numbers that were actually harvested in 2016 and 2015, because in this example, we started our calculator running 2 years before today. Okay? So those are the inputs that go into the calculator, and we now run those through the calculations I showed you before, and we get projections of what the population will be like in the future. Okay? And in the example I showed you before, I only showed you the calculations to go forward 1 year, but we just repeat that out for as many years as we want to make our projections forward into the future. Okay? And the examples here, we ran them forward 10 years, I believe. So these are all inputs that go into the full version of the calculator, again, used by a scientist or manager. But once they've set that up, other users can come along and use the simplified version of the calculator. Okay? And this is an example, the screens that you'll see in the simplified version. Okay? And one of the things to note first off is that I have it configured to run in Greenlandic right now. So we have set the simplified version up to run, if I go over here, we can pick between Greenlandic, I believe this is Danish and Greenlandic, and I believe this says probably default language, which for better or worse means English. That's my programmer's work. Probably should say just English. But we can have as many languages as we want. We just need somebody to translate for us all the terms on the screen. But we've set it up right now just to show you today in Greenlandic, okay? So this is an example. This is, if I just open up this scenario, these are the inputs that I showed you in the full version previously. In the simplified version, a user does not have access to all the survey information and the birth rates and all that complicated scientific stuff. They simply have access to, on this last screen, the harvest quota. So this allows a user in the community to come in with all the science that was put in previously in the full version and to simply try different what-if scenarios of how the harvest might unfold in the future. And again, here are those same harvest quotas for 2017, and here, for example, is the line where I have said that there would be 77 age 5 plus bulls harvested in 2017. Okay? So once these are in the system, a user can say, I want to run a calculation forward in time for this particular combination of assumptions, and they'll run this model, and it will go through a process of doing all these calculations. Running down there. Okay. And when it's done, then I can look at the results. I don't understand all the things on the screen, but this is an example of the kind of output you would get. Okay. And we noticed here when we ran this week that we missed some translation, so there's a few English terms that we forgot, but we will fix those over the next couple of weeks, so that these will be in Greenlandic too. But this graph up here is an important one, and what it shows is along the bottom here is time. This is starting in 2015 right here, and we're projecting out to the year 2025. And this line here represents our projection for what the total herd population or size will be over time. So it's starting at a certain size here, and we're projecting it to slowly, pretty steady, but slowly decline. And this is a scenario where we, again, assumed that the harvest in 2017 would be identical to what it was in 2016, and also would be at that level for the next 10 years. So this we call, in English, a business as usual scenario, which means we continue to do what we did in the past into the future. Okay? And it shows a certain total harvest for that scenario, how many animals we get. And if I look, I bring up another chart, I can go into more detail. I think it's this one, right? Yeah. And this, for example, is a second chart, which on the top here shows, again, over time into the future, the total number of animals that are age 5 plus bulls. They call these trophy bulls. So this is what was most important to the community, and it shows how many of them there will be in the population. And we see a bit of a problem here because they're interested in harvesting the trophy bulls, yet the projections are that if they keep harvesting as many as they have in the past, the number in the population will drop down to as low as only 13 trophy bulls in 2019. Okay? And here's the harvest of trophy bulls, and you can see they're starting out at about 80 per year, but if they continue at that rate, the calculator projects they'll run out of trophy bulls and it'll eventually come back up. So what we can do then is we can take this scenario here that we just looked at and make a copy of it. Did it work? Oh, it's saved. I don't know my words. That's copy.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. So here's, we made a copy of it, and we can give it a new name. And I don't know Greenlandic, so I will say a new scenario with no young bulls, right?
Yeah.
And let's say no cows.
Yeah.
Okay, so all we're going to harvest is trophy bulls. We're going to save the cows so they can produce more trophy bulls. Okay, and we would go over here then, and for 2017, right here, we would change the quota so that these are the cows, I believe, Hunkin?
Yep. No, that's, well, some of the
male.
males.
Those are the males?
Male,
Remember
yeah,
Hans Brinker, Hansel and Gretel, so
Right,
Hans's boy, and
Okay.
yeah.
So there, we will do that. We'll leave the trophy bulls as they were, right? And then that's 0 already, and we will remove all the cow harvest. So this is a pretty extreme scenario, but going from hunting 200 animals per year, of which at least half of them were females, cows, we're going now to harvesting no cows, no young bulls, and just saving all the harvest for trophy bulls. Okay? So we can save that change, and now I can click on that and run it.
Running.
Okay. Is it done yet? Yep. And now I can select both of those and compare them. Okay? So if I go back to that here, this again is my graph of the total projected population. And it shows in blue, this is the scenario I did before where we had 200 animals per year. And this is the new scenario where I cut the harvest way down, right? So I dropped my harvest from 200, this is quite a dramatic scenario, down to just trophy bulls, which is around 50 or 40, but the trophy bulls eventually come back up to 80, and the population explodes. So again, this would, from what Christine would say, is actually, as the scenario is nice for trophy bulls, but it actually, we're probably putting too many animals on this range for what it could support. So we could continue playing with this, and this is what we did yesterday on the ferry home with one of the local hunters, is we tried a bunch of different alternatives of adding more cows and taking away trophy bulls and going back and forth until we got a scenario where the population stayed fairly steady, the trophy harvest was reasonable, and there was also a reasonable cow harvest to supply meat to the community. Okay? That's the process that we expect people to go through with this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah, if I
Go
might
ahead.
just underline, this last scenario was just to get trophy bulls. But in Evitude, it's not just trophy bulls that bring money in. There are people who are not trophy agents. Most are not. So, and they rely on the meat harvest. So we have to have both trophy and meat. So this pink reddish scenario cannot work for Evitude in the long run. The meat hunters, the Ervag hunters need the meat quota too. So we worked and worked, and then Colin will present another scenario now.
Right.
But you work through many scenarios until you find the one that is what gives the hunters what the hunters are wanting.
So I've switched back to the full version of the simulation again, and that's because on the ferry yesterday we did our various scenarios in this full version because I was driving it, and we haven't moved them over to be available in the light version just yet. Although it wouldn't be hard, but anyway.
We just arrived this morning.
Yeah,
We
got off
haven't
the
had
ferry.
time.
So here is an example. Here are 3 scenarios that we looked at yesterday, okay, for Evitude. So the first one, we adjusted the harvest down from 2018 to 2020, and then we slowly increased the harvest back up to be 55 cows per year and 60 trophy animals. And then we did another scenario where we increased the meat or cow harvest a little higher to 60 and 60. And then we tried a third scenario where we brought the cows down and the trophies down a bit. Okay, so we were playing around with different scenarios. So to give you an example, in this full version, I can also look at the results. So, although I'm losing part of my screen here. So again, this is this summary graph that we've been looking at, although I turned off 2 of the things. So this is the scenario that we showed with what was this first scenario? Anyway, we have 3 scenarios, and I'm actually going to just look at the means of them. I'm going to take off these error ranges because it gets complicated in a minute if I don't. And so this is the scenario where we had 55 cows and 60 trophy bulls. And in fact, I can bring up the graph of just trophy bulls here. Okay. if it's not getting too small. But this is the harvest of trophy bulls here, okay? And this is the number of trophy bulls. And if I take another scenario like this and I add it, you can see now if I don't have enough room because of the projector resolution here, but here I harvest a few more cows, and the population, when I do that, the red line shows that it decreases a little bit more. If I look over on the trophy, oh, I didn't do it here. It's too hard for me to show all this on the little screen on the projector. But if I add the third one, okay, what we see here, maybe if I show it like this, is these are the three scenarios that I just compared. And you can see the last scenario where I had 55 cows and 54 trophy bulls. That's the one in green where the population does a little better than the other two. And I can see that my total harvest is a little bit less, and so on and so forth. So without getting into the details, we can compare scenarios like this and project out what they might look like for the herd. Is there anything else I've missed? I think that was the end of my presentation. Oh, I was going to show the other herds that we've done.
And also, you can also,
So that was all for Inuit Muskox. This week we also tried the program, the calculator, on two other herds. Okay, the first of those is a reindeer herd. Stefan manages. However you pronounce it, Isotusua. So again, we were able to configure the model for Isotusua, where we had a difference initial count and slight difference estimates for the birth rate and the mortality rate and all that. And we can do similar kinds of projections for that herd. We also did a model for Nanortalik.
yes.
Yep.
Very good.
I tried to de-anglophone it, I say it, but I have no idea if I'm doing it right. I know that the English pronunciation is definitely wrong. So. And so in this case here, we were looking, this is a herd that's starting with, I don't know if you want to give some background, Nette or Mike?
I was looking at the numbers, weren't you?
Or Christina?
I'm afraid I didn't get up to the numbers are from the original number that were taken from Inuit down to Nanortalik in 2014 and released. And so that's our input numbers for females and males and the age that they were when they were captured and released. And then Barnugarak has been down there several times since, and in his talking with local people and hunters, he has heard that there has been some what in English is called poaching and in Danish is called kribskytteri. We don't know how much, but we put then in, Colin will discuss that we were able to put some of that in. At the same time for Nanortalik, right now, this year, there are two of the erverv hunters, commercial hunters, who are taking the training course to become trophy agents and could develop a business based on trophy hunters in the Nanortalik area. So, and they would like to know how quickly can they start hunting for the trophies. Also, the other erverv hunters, commercial hunters in the Nanortalik also want to know how quickly can we begin shooting for meat and selling. So that is how Colin and us, the rest of us, try to deal with it, how soon or what would happen with the with this population of only 19 animals, very small number, and then you've got poaching, kribskytteri, into the mix, and how volatile that makes it for the development of this this population, if it can even get established.
So maybe I'll show you, I found actually I was not involved in this. The others did this without me to show that it doesn't require somebody like me to do these, set these things up. But I was very interested in the results. Is it the first scenario and the second one, Nette?
I would say the first one, and then maybe, was it 16 would be interesting as well. And then the one
35?
10 as well. No, sorry, 6 is, no.
Well, we'll
this
show,
one.
maybe I'll add them, I'll do them one at a time, okay? So if I show just this first scenario, and we look at the total population, again.
This is no harvest.
This is a population, in fact, I'll take off these graphs here for a second so you can see the whole thing bigger. So this is an estimate. The population started with 19 animals in 2014. And if we let it ride for, this is a long time, how many years is it, 30 years?
30 years.
30 years, the estimate is, without any harvest, the population would reach 700, 800 animals. Okay? That's the estimate with the rates we put in there. However, we know already, as Christine said, there was some poaching, right? Is this just with one female a year? So even just taking one female per year, okay? This I was very surprised by. This is the effect on the population projected of losing one animal per year. In 30 years, instead of being at 800 animals, 700 animals, you're only at 230. So it has a huge effect. And the reason for that is the effect all happens down in here. With only 19 animals, there only are 8 or 9 cows. And if you have 8 or 9 cows and you lose one of them per year, so now you're down from 8 to 7, and each one of those, only half of them produce a calf, right? Because that's about 50%. So of the 8, you've got 4 calves. But if you lose one of those females, now you're down from 4 to 3, and you do that every year, and it compounds. Just like when you take money out of your bank accounts, you know, you don't leave it there for savings. It's the same kind of projection, right? You're not getting the interest on your capital in a bank account when you take the cows out of your population. They can't produce the calves. So, I was very surprised at how big an effect just one animal per year of poaching can do.
On a small...
One female, now that's an extreme, one female, not one. If the bulls are poached, that's a different thing. If you could get your poachers to just take bulls, you'd be better off.
Okay, so then we try to turn it around, saying again, which kind of questions would we get as a manager? And that would be exactly like Christine was saying before, you know, they want to know when can they harvest. Another thing we wanted to look into, and that the model can also be used for, is if people are asking, you know, can we move muskox to our area, there's already some structure, some things they have to, you know, as requested there, like the vegetation, examination, stuff like that. But also, how many animals should you actually move? I mean, it's a lot of money that the municipality puts into this movement. And this shows that with this very low amount of poaching, it could have been wasted. I mean, the population down there can die out. So try and show the one with 25. It's not a lot of more animals.
Which one is that?
Oh,
this
move
one?
more animals.
If you move more animals, so
okay.
18 females instead of 12 females would have made a large difference.
Now you're poaching 2 per year, though.
Yeah, but this is because this is what was
Okay.
told to us, you know, that it was a high rate of poaching down there. So we took worst case scenario and then tried to put in as many animals that the population would still increase.
So that, anyway, you get the idea of how the tool, I think, or we think, can be used. That's the end of my part.
The energy model and the
Right,
and all that.
right, okay. So one last slide, just to tell you other things that we've been working on outside of this project with caribou and doing projections of caribou. In Canada, where's my PowerPoint? Canada, we've just recently completed a first version of a project where we've been trying to develop a tool that would help predict what the effect of industrial development, mining, might be on a caribou herd, okay? And so there what we've done is we've linked together 3 models together, one of which is the calculator you just saw here, but two other models along with it to try and make those projections. So the inputs to this model, it's quite a bit more complicated, but what we put into it, and we ran this for a herd, the Bathurst caribou herd in the Canadian Arctic, and we had data on locations of caribou over time from collars, okay? And so we knew where caribou were moving. We also had information about what their range was like, what vegetation was available to them, and some, estimates of where future mines, where existing mines were and future mines might go on that range, okay? And then we also put in the same kinds of data that I showed you here for the population calculator. So information on population size and harvest, okay? And so in this model, the first model takes some of this information and predicts out into the future where caribou are most likely to move across the range, okay? And it also predicts where new developments might occur on the landscape. So you see here an example where it is putting new developments on the landscape and connecting those developments with roads. So it's including what roads might be built on your landscape, okay? And we feed that into a second model, which we've been working on for over 30 years now, to predict if you know the habitat, the food supply, and how much certain characteristics of your herd in terms of how much activity they do during the day of different forms, we can predict for an individual caribou what their body condition will be like at the end of the year. So it predicts how much fat and how much muscle they'll have at the end of the year based on how much they move around and what food they encounter.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
The body condition is important because the body condition on a female cow decides if she becomes pregnant or not. And if she becomes pregnant, does she abort that little caribou calf, or does she keep it and give birth? And finally, does she give birth to a weak, scropery calf, or does she give birth to a healthy, big calf and give lots of milk? Cow body condition, extremely important for the production of calves and the survival of calves in your population. That's why this is important.
Right. The second thing, that's the main effect of body condition on the population, is its effect on birth rate and condition of calves. The other is on the mortality rate, the natural mortality rate. So we have a relationship that's been developed through research work that's been done in the Canadian Arctic and in Alaska that shows, based on the weight of a cow or entering the winter, what its survival rate is to be through to the next spring. So the less fat reserves it has, the more likely it is to die that year, okay? And so we combine that with the calculator you just saw now, and we were able to project changes in the population of this herd as a function of changes in vegetation, climate, and development, okay? So Annette asked me to just show you that in case anybody on the call was interested in that work. I can direct people to more information into it on our website. And I think I'm done now.
Martin, Christine, Luca, any of you got anything you want to add?
Maybe just for when we looked at the Nautilus model, there was this interest in, of course, trophy hunting. Some of the people are being trained as trophy agents, and we kind of looked at that and looked specifically at when could you possibly start to harvest trophy bulls. They don't have a big impact on the herd, but it clearly showed that it's quite some years from now. I mean, we are talking very few trophy bulls which would be available in maybe 3 or 4 available in 2025. So it is a long term. It's not so. When Nette said that as managers, as the government, one will get these answers or get these questions. When can we start harvesting, in this case, trophy bulls? And it's not tomorrow, for sure. It will take some years and require some patience and some very good protection locally, because it's so fragile with only 19 to start with. And it does mean that future ideas about moving herds, one should really make sure that it's more than 19. And these are things that you couldn't, without the calculator, it's simply too complex to figure out. There's too much math going into it, so you couldn't figure that out unless you were helped by the model. But it has huge implications in terms of how one would do this in the future, and the response that you as the government, as a department, would have to give to people who are very anxious to get started on doing hunting. It was just
Stefan, do you have anything to...
Yeah, exactly, because you were also part of the project.
Oh, sorry.
Well,
On your experience with us configuring it for your reindeer herd.
yeah, I have had 2 days of learning experience with you, whether I could use this program as a managing device, so that I have a better overlook over the herd. And I'm glad that it came. I made an inquiry to Norway many years ago, whether they had something similar in the administration of reindeer husbandry in Norway, and this kind of a program was non-existent. And so I welcome this tool for us as producers to use. It's very user-friendly. If you learn it properly, it will give you a very good overview over what you are doing, and also in the predictions for the future. Thank you.
Are there any questions? I think if we start with the questions in this room, we can ask Kia, Fernando and Svein afterwards. Karen?
Thank you for a very interesting model here. I know it is complex, but does the model in any way register what climate change will do for the herds and where they can eat and so on? I mean, I know
Yes.
it can be difficult, but in this day and age, so many things are changing.
Yeah, we discussed that this week, how we could do that, and it would be possible to do that. The way there are a couple of different ways you could do it, a fairly simple way and a more complicated way. The simple way that we discussed is, right now we had that natural mortality rate that was fixed at 4 or 6% all the time. If you had a hypothesis about how that mortality might change as a function of climate change, say there are more icing events, you know you're going to get every 10 years a 40% mortality event, we could model that in here. But you would have to come up with a hypothesis of the connection between future climate change and possible mortality. So we could put that in. And the second way is with that more complicated model I showed you for the Canadian Arctic. That was specifically designed to look at climate change as well as development, because there we were predicting the effect of climate on vegetation, then the vegetation on the animal's body condition, and the body condition of the population. That's the complicated way to do it. It takes a lot more effort, but it's another route, a way you could do it as well. Yeah. So thank you. That's good. Yes.
We're working in sheep farming, and
Yes.
the climate change, it's very hard for sheep farmers.
Yeah.
For 3 years ago, we had a very dry summer, no rain in 3 months. And it becomes to get lambs, there were up to 3 kilos smaller than normal summer.
Right.
And there was, it's the sheeps. We missed other 2-3% in summer breeding for sheeps.
They
The
didn't
climate
breed, yeah.
change is really hard
Yeah,
for farmers.
Right. Yeah,
It's an information to you.
right. Yeah, we're very interested in the question of climate change and adding it to this. And as I said, I think there's a fairly simple way to do it, just even to get at the risk to your herd, as opposed to the definitive answer. It's just, here we have a greater risk that your population will decline under climate change. I think that analysis could be added fairly easily, even by just with Christine, without any changes to the software. Yeah.
Any further questions from here?
I'd like to add something about the nanoclinic, the Muskox. We moved 12 females, 7 bulls in 2014, and they were 2.5 years old, all of them.
2 of them were 1.5. Parnagaric gave me the numbers.
Which means that the bulls would be 8.5 in 2020, thus being trophy bulls. And as manager, I would say that I don't expect the trophy hunting to start before the meat hunting. If they start, it would be at the same time. That's the situation when you're a manager. You have to think about different interests. You can't just look at one and deny the other interest. You have to look at the same time.
Any further comments or questions? No. Kia, Svein, or Fernando, do you have any questions? Can they?
No, I'm okay. Thank you. It was very good.
Okay, Fernando, I hope that you can tell Jussi that this can also be used for the industry, for mining industry, and evaluate, some kind of evaluation of the effect of mine industry or any kind of industry up here.
Yeah, I was interested to see also that it could take the cumulative effect into consideration. I think we are doing. It reminds me some of the work we have a commission together with Canada for the polar bear advice this year, which was it was a modeling taking into consideration that the sea ice where the polar bear are hunting is reducing every year, so they have some areas they have more and more days on land every year, and that will affect their reproduction and survival. So it's good to see that there are several several species were moving away from the models that take only hunting into consideration, but also climate and other activities. I'm happy to see that.
Exactly.
That this is happening. Thank you.
Thanks. And Kia and Svein, do you have any questions?
Okay.
Assume they don't.
Yeah.
Yes. But then I think I will say thank you to all of you for coming. There are some videos online, and there's the possibility of downloading the software and come and talk to Nuuk and me and Christine, of course, if you want to look into this further. I will send you the link. Thank you. Tusind tak.